Welcome to the program, everyone. Wow, lots to discuss today. We got a travel warning. Don't go to Florida. No, not happening. Don't go to Florida, says the NAACP. This is pretty crazy stuff. Momentarily, we're going to have Larry Elder. He's a presidential candidate. You may know him as a longtime radio show host. He's going to be joining us on that. It seems as though race is the one place they just keep wanting to go back to. You consider what Joe Biden had to say recently at Howard University. I have a feeling Larry will have a thing or two to say about all of that. You know, he's the second Black candidate to be in the Republican pool for presidency. Senator Tim Scott just announcing the news that he will be running as well. You've got Nikki Haley, a woman. You've got Vivek Ramaswamy, who is from India originally, born here. But I mean, a very, very diverse crowd. They're in the Republican field, and yet somehow they keep going back to that well. So curious to hear Larry's thoughts. Again, Larry Elder joining the show just momentarily. Meanwhile, Bud Light facing more trouble. I mean, these guys just can't get out of trouble. You're not going to believe the latest. They're losing their very special CEI rating. This is like another version of ESG, plus Ted Cruz. And Marsha Blackburn, senators are now asking questions. Were they marketing illegally to kids? We must discuss. Plus, Gorsuch out with a scathing indictment of what our country did during March 2020. I can't wait to get into all of that with you. And we got some new developments over on the FBI front. Welcome to the program, everyone. I am Trish Regan. It's the Trish Regan Show. We are brought to you in part, as always, by LegacyPMInvestments.com, LegacyPMInvestments.com if you're interested in gold and silver. More on that coming up. But I want to get to the big story of the day. And the big story of the day, of course, is this news coming to us right now out of Florida. The NAACP making the decision. There he is, Larry Elder, Republican candidate for president, author of a fabulous, fabulous new book. We're going to talk all about it. But Larry, good to see you. This is live. So you're here with me now, and we're reacting to this news that we got from the NAACP. Don't go to Florida. Florida's a bad place because apparently it's quite racist. What's your thought on that?
Trish, don't get me started on the NAACP. Last year, they had their annual convention, and there were four things that they were concerned about. The first was reproductive rights. Now, I'm pro-life, but however you feel about that, how is that a civil right? The next one was student debt relief. Again, however you feel about that, how is that a civil right? I happen to oppose the idea of people who never went to college forgiving the debt of those who did. The other one was voter suppression, including voter ID. Well, here's the problem. Majority of blacks support voter ID. And after Joe Biden referred to the Georgia laws as worse than Jim Crow, their Jim Eagle, whatever the bleep that meant, more black Georgians voted than ever before. The last one was police brutality, the lie that the police are engaging in systemic racism against black people. Studies have shown the police, if anything, are more hesitant, Trish, more reluctant to pull the trigger on a black suspect than a white suspect. And by calling the police systemically racist, you've caused what's called the George Floyd effect. And that is the police pulling back from their proactive policing. And as a result, there have been studies that show thousands of people who are now dead, who otherwise wouldn't be dead, most of whom are black, if the police were engaging in their normal proactive policing. So this is what the NAACP concentrates on. They omit the 10,000-pound elephant in the room, Trish, which is the epidemic of fatherlessness. 70% of black kids today enter the home without a father in the home, married to the mother. This is ignored by the NAACP. And the poor, abysmal performance of our urban schools. 85% of black eighth graders, these are 13-year-old blacks, Trish, according to the nation's so-called national report card, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, 85% of black eighth graders can neither read nor do math at grade level. 50% cannot do basic math, basic reading. So a large number of black 13-year-olds are running around the country, Trish, functionally illiterate. And the NAACP wants to boycott Florida because the governor of Florida does not want white kids taught that they're oppressed and black people taught that they're victims. Scotty, beam me up.
I mean, look, you are, first of all, I'm just going to, again, great to have you here. I mean, it's crazy, this whole live thing. So bear with me on my tech front, but it's wonderful to see you. And the viewers should just know, Larry and I go way back. We were both at Fox together. I'll have to ask you about that. But now Larry, who ran for governor, and by the way, California sure as heck could have used you, Larry, because look at the trouble they're in now. They were foolish. They've got Gavin Newsom in the slot. And we all know, and this is part of what your book is all about. wow, it's called So Goes California. Let me see if I can bring up the cover. We all know the trouble that they've gotten themselves into. Now you're running for, as goes California, now you're running for president of the United States. And I think, you more than anyone have just cut through to the reality, which is that, you got to have sort of the basics, right? You got to have a mom and a dad and a shot. And part of having a shot, and study after study, I've talked about this with you in the past, shows that those that have a successful financial future, the one common ingredient, this is amazing to me, the one common thing is that you see right across, it transcends everything. It's when you grow up with a mom and a dad, you got a 2-parent household, and somehow that's sort of the make or break. So I know you feel pretty passionately about this, right? You can't just hand out money like California wants to do. What are they talking about? 350 grand all the way up to like 1.2 million for every person who's a relative of a slave?
And that's why I'm asking people to read my book, As Goes California. You can order it right now on Amazon or on Barnes & Noble. Obama wrote a book. His first book was called Dreams from My Father, a very good book about the angst that he felt not having his biological father in the house. The last time he saw his biological father, he was 10 years old. And Obama said a kid raised without a father is 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in jail. Now, the question we ought to be asking ourselves, what the NAACP ought to be asking, is how have we gone from having 25% of Black kids entering the world in 1965 without a father in the home married to the mother to 70% today? Are you prepared to say America is more racist today than it was back in 65? The answer is the welfare state, Trish. We've incentivized women to marry the government. We've incentivized men to abandon their financial and moral responsibility.
No, it's a huge problem. It's a huge problem. And, you've articulated this so well. It came at a particular time in history, right? In the 1960s, if we go back, all with very good intentions, like all these things, it's the law of unintended consequences, as we like to talk about, right? Certainly in economics. I mean, people wanted good stuff and they wanted to be able to ensure that everybody had an equal shot, but it kind of had the reverse effect, Larry.
Absolutely. When I grew up in the 50s and the 60s, virtually every single one of my friends had a mother and a father in the home. Today, that's the reverse. And that, again, is the number one problem facing this country. The large number of kids, it's 40% of all American kids, Trish, enter the world without a father in the home married to the mother. Half of Hispanic kids, 25% of white kids. And you look at, I've got a good friend named Tom Sowell, Walter Williams, that told me this: unless there's somebody in the house who has made sure that you've been fed, been clothed, been housed, make sure you've done your homework and have gone to bed on time, you are in deep, deep voodoo. And the NAACP keeps ignoring that problem, and they focus on racism when race has never been a less important factor in American life. America is the only majority white country that's elected a Black president and reelected one, even though Barack Obama presided over the worst economic recovery in American history. Racism has never been a less significant factor. The way to escape poverty, both the Brookings Institution on the left and the American Enterprise Institute on the right, these two think tanks, give the same formula to escape poverty. First, finish high school, one presumably where you can read, write, and compute at grade level. Number 2, don't have a kid until you're 20 years old. Number 3, get married before you have that kid. Number 4, get a job. Don't quit that job until you get another job. And number 5, I would add, avoid the criminal justice system. You do those things, you will not be poor in America.
Yeah, kind of a basic sort of plan, guide to success. And yet, NAACP, I mean, I highlighted it and everything because I'm just blown away by this. I guess the goal is they want to hurt Florida because it relies on tourism, but, they picked the wrong time of year to do it. By the way, I'm going to Florida on Thursday. I'm heading down to Palm Beach. Why not? I'll show my patronage there for the state. Look, they say, please be advised that Florida public schools will not teach your children accurate African-American history, which includes a history of enslavement, segregation, racial injustice, and systemic racism. So I guess that's part of it, right? The systemic racism. Larry, yeah. I grew up in New Hampshire. I think I've told you this before. So I grew up in New Hampshire. So, there was no, you couldn't be, this is a weird thing to say, but you almost couldn't be racist, right? Because there was no group other than, we're all kind of the same. And people might think, oh, well, that makes you that. No. It actually, I think by the time I was, in an academic enough environment and I was in a very diverse, multicultural community, like everybody, I never had like a preconceived, this is weird to say, but like, like maybe if you grow up in LA and you're like, okay, I don't go to that bad neighborhood or this or that or the other. I mean, you just like growing up, we didn't really ever have any of these preconceived notions. And my whole goal has always been to just see you and the person, right? Like you never want to see, oh, that person's Asian, that person's African American, that person's Hispanic. The goal should always be to almost like see through to the person themselves, right? Including like, I don't care if, you're blonde or brunette or pretty or ugly. Like hopefully our goal as human beings is to see through all that. And certainly it was the goal of Martin Luther King Jr. And yet I feel like nowadays, because everybody's walking on eggshells and everybody's so terrified. And this really kind of came to fruition in those dark days of the Black Lives Matter riots, et cetera, in 2020. I feel like now it's like, oh my gosh, it's like all you can see. You have to see it. And if you don't see it, you're going to be in trouble. Now, how sad is that for America?
It is sad. And I blame a lot of that, Trish, on Barack Obama. I was in 2004 in Boston when he gave that rafter-ringing speech introducing John Kerry. There's no blue America. There's no red America. There's no black America. There's no white America. There's just one United States of America. The man won with a little more than 52% of the vote. Third week of January 2009, he walks into the Oval Office before he signed any executive order, before he signed any bill. His approval was at 70%. Why? It isn't that all of a sudden people who didn't vote for him said, you know what, I want my taxes raised. I want Obamacare. No, they felt at the very least he would pierce the notion that America is systemically racist. And what did he do? When he entered the Oval Office, both blacks and whites thought race relations would get better. And then we go from the Cambridge Police acted stupidly. If I had a son that looked like Trayvon, to saying that racism is America's DNA, to embracing Black Lives Matter, to embracing Al Sharpton, had him in the White House over 70 times. Had Eric Holder, his AG, referred to voter ID, which blacks support, as an example of pernicious racism, to the point when he left Oval Office, both blacks and whites thought race relations got worse.
Yeah. I mean, what a shame.
Trish, my father never knew his biological father, so it's not a death sentence. Born in 1915, Athens, Georgia, Jim Crow South. His illiterate mom threw him out of the house at the age of 13, literally dirt poor. And my dad ended up cleaning toilets when I was growing up. He started a cafe when he was 47 years old. That's 20 years longer than the average person who starts a business. He saved his nickels and dimes. And when my dad retired, he owned the property where the cafe was, the property next door to it, plus the home we have still in our family. So my dad had a net worth of a little bit under $1 million. An 8th grade dropout, black boy in America. That's what can happen in America.
No,
yeah,
I mean, and that's why.
Before the Civil Rights Act, before the Voting Rights Act, before Brown versus Education, blacks kept moving forward. In 1940, 87% of blacks lived under the poverty line. 20 years later, that number had fallen to 47%. That's a 40-point drop in 20 years, the greatest 20-year period of economic expansion for blacks in American history. Why? It was rare for a black kid to be raised without a father, a belief in Judeo-Christian values, a belief in hard work and entrepreneurship, and a belief in patriotism, even if America was not living up to its values as applies to black people. And now today in America, you have Haitians lining up, Trish, for a lottery to get into a country that's systemically racist. It's nonsense, and it's hurting the very people that you claim that you care about.
Well, and it is so political, and I want to get to that in a second, but I'm just going to tell you like a brief aside. What you just said is so important and so powerful, and this is what's lost, right? You know, I had a grandfather, by the way, who didn't finish the 7th grade, but wound up becoming the Secretary of Education in New Hampshire, because you know what? Like it happens. Like this is part of the American dream, and all his kids went on to great stuff, and you know, this is what we want, right, for our children, and it was important to me as a kid to hear all those stories. As I think, Larry, it was really important to you. Here you are running for president of the United States now. Here you are, just such an enormous success, such a positive thinker. And I firmly believe, without getting too, mystical here, that positivity is so critical. And we're losing that. Like, that's not what kids are taught. Instead, they're taught, well, you need a handout because your ancestors hundreds of years ago were enslaved. Okay, yeah, no, that was bad. Like, look, lots of populations have gone through challenging times. And I do believe that the Black population in America had an extra challenging time, obviously, because of all that. And we all feel bad about it. But you know what? You move forward, right? And part of the success is yeah, I grew up in the Jim Crow South and I did this. Or I was even thinking back what you just said about how you were taught to be patriotic, even when the country wasn't even living up to its standards. I have a background in classical music, and I was recently listening to some recordings. I'm going to play them one of these days on the show, of Marian Anderson on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial from like 1937. This was a woman who grew up poor in Philadelphia, somehow went to integrated schools because they had those somehow back in 37, I don't know, wound up studying music, had this enormous, incredible voice, sang all over Europe, was a superstar, and then she came back and the Daughters of the American Revolution didn't want her to sing at Constitution Hall. So she said, you know what, I'm taking it to the people. And she did this amazing concert for 50,000 people outside the Lincoln Memorial. And she sang, "My Country 'Tis of Thee. Right. Sweet land of liberty, of thee I love." And it was that patriotism, again, like loving her country despite what she was up against, but also knowing, Larry, she could overcome it. She could Absolutely. Go direct to the people.
Absolutely. And Trish, I'm in California, and as you know, the reparations panel has suggested that every Black Californian get $1.2 million. A big problem, of course, California was admitted as a free state. So they get around it by saying, well, it's not about slavery. It's about mistreatment. It's about grievances. It's about redlining or over policing or mass incarceration. Well, you know, there were laws that prevented Japanese Americans from owning farmland in California. And of course, they were put in relocation camps. There were laws that prevented Chinese Americans from competing in the laundry business in the Bay Area. Fast forward, the average household income of a Chinese American, the average household income of a Japanese American is higher than the average income of a white American. Why? Belief in strong families, belief in hard work, belief in embracing education. That's what you should be telling Black people today. Instead, you're telling them that you're victims, and somebody who did nothing to you is owed something. You are owed something from people who did nothing to you.
So the reason for that,
I've called reparations the extraction of money from people who were never slave owners, Trish, to be given to people who were never slaves.
Interesting, right? Yeah. No, I'm like, look, you know, my ancestors weren't even here way back then. It's just, it's insane, and it's going to create more of a wedge.
7 generations ago, and you're telling me that right now I'm suffering because of what happened 7 generations ago. And again, the real commonality, the whole approach to the reparations panel is to close what they call the wealth gap. Well, the fatherlessness gap is a much bigger factor in the wealth gap than any of this stuff that you're talking about. And the failure of our public schools to educate kids is a much bigger factor than any of the things that you're talking about. But the NAACP does not support school choice. By the way, Florida does. So you have school choice in Florida, but the NAACP is telling Black people not to go there, where Florida is giving you a better chance to get a good education than, say, places like California.
You cited some important statistics as we started this about kids not being able to read, kids not knowing basic math. I did a story years ago for Network News on this. It's in New York City, this exact issue. They just pass them along, Larry, because no teacher wants to deal with it. And so they just get passed along grade to grade, and there's nobody checking to make sure that they really can read, write, add, subtract. And it's just a horrible, we're setting these kids up so poorly. And you look now at what happened during March 2020, and Neil Gorsuch is out with a really scathing indictment, the Supreme Court justice, talking about how this was just such a massive overreach in terms of, you know, almost a totalitarian, my words, not his, totalitarian sort of state, right? And who are the kids that lost out the most, Larry? Because those were the schools, am I right, in the inner cities across America that are run by all these union advocates and liberals that are most disadvantaged now.
Yeah, Black and brown kids were already behind, and now they're behind another year, or in California, almost 2 years in math and in reading. And the proof is in the pudding, Trish. There was a study some years ago where public school teachers, I call them government school teachers, were asked where they put their own school-age kids. Nationwide, around 10% of families have their kids in private school. Around 6% of Black families do. 49% of Philadelphia public school teachers with school-age kids put their own kids in private school. In Chicago, it's 39%. So the people who know the school system the best, teachers, aren't putting their own kids in it. It's the equivalent of opening up a restaurant, putting up a sign saying, come on in, eat the food. We sure won't.
Now, I'm looking, by the way, at some of our viewers who are just joining us right now. We are talking with Larry Elder, candidate for president of the United States. He's out with a brand new book, As Goes California. You can pre-order it right now. Go to Amazon, As Goes California. He has a lot of thoughts on the importance of policy and how it affects the entire country. And I know he's extremely disappointed, as are so many of us, at the state of things right now. But I wonder, look, you look at the polls, and we can talk about DeSantis. We can talk about Tim Scott, too, who actually, I look at it, but aside, Larry, and I'm like, the Republican Party seems pretty darn diverse. You've got yourself, you've got Senator Scott, you've got Nikki Haley, you've got, Vivek Ramaswamy. You have a very multicultural group. I kind of am troubled that they keep going back to the well. But is it not true that this is one of those things that just kind of gins up support? I guess if you don't have real policies, Joe Biden doesn't. Let's be very clear. He had no economic international policies that were really going to take us in a new direction. So what, you go back to race?
Well, that's right. He's underwater on inflation, underwater on the economy, underwater on virtually every single issue. And what he's going to do is run against Donald Trump. I watch a lot of CNN and MSNBC, Trish, and my girlfriend and I say, okay, what's the over-under on how long it'll take MSNBC or CNN to bring up Donald Trump? And generally speaking, it's around 90 seconds. And that's one of the reasons I'm running. I'm asking people to throw something in the tip jar at elderforpresident.com. We, meaning Republicans, are of two minds about Donald Trump. There are those who love him, and there are those who love what Donald Trump did as president, but don't love the possibility that he might lose in November against Joe Biden. Now, I don't know what to do about Trump derangement syndrome. Maybe someday they'll develop a vaccine. But I ask people to answer the following questions. Have you lost friends because of Donald Trump? Are you no longer speaking to coworkers because of Donald Trump? Have you a strained relationship because of relatives because of Donald Trump? And the answer to that is yes, yes, and yes. And in my case, it is. In the case of most people I know who voted for Donald Trump, the answer is yes. Then Houston, we've got a problem. And the problem is swing voters, particularly suburban moms in swing states. Now, the question is, if you love the American First agenda, and I do, and you agree with most of the Donald Trump did, and I do you want somebody who is palatable enough, likable enough, knowledgeable enough, with enough sense of humor, so a sufficient number of swing voters can vote for him so that we win in November 2024? If that is your analysis, I'm your man.
Look, I agree with you on the policy front. Some of the best policies I have seen. And I'll start with the tax policy. Let me just say, I read every tax policy, including, I remember Senator Crude had a dense one, and he had a VAT tax that the Europeans use buried deep in there. But listen, I thought the tax policy was outstanding. And what was so great about that was you actually saw what happened. Oh, our economy grew. And by the way, this is important. This is interesting. When you look at minority groups and average middle Americans, they actually saw the most increase in wages and overall household income adjusted for inflation, more than they had ever seen in decades and decades. It might have been the largest in history. And so it shows you that, you put the right policies into place and you can have really good outcomes. His mistake, frankly, and I'm well on record for this one, was shutting down the country like he did. That actually played, I think, in some ways right into the Democrats' hands. But here's another question, because they go after you too, Larry, and they're going after DeSantis. Let's not kid ourselves. What is this NAACP thing happening at this time for? Oh, well, DeSantis is also expected to announce that he's going to run this week. So they're trying to say that, okay, he's racist, he's awful. They've said the same stuff about you. And I kind of look at it and say, wow, like this is just, they're going to go to this. Maybe some people play to it more than others. Maybe Trump didn't play to it enough. Maybe he was just too tough and was like, okay, buddy, bring it on. But you have to expect that, right? And do you expect that? You've already gotten it.
Of course, the LA Times called me the black face of white supremacy. And another LA Times reporter referred to my views as white supremacists. That's what they do. They take the knife and put it in the mustard jar of racism and spread it over everything and anything they can. Why? They want to get the black people angry and believing that America is systemically racist because they need that near 90 to 95% monolithic black vote without which they cannot win. They don't want blacks to start thinking about crime or about educational policies or about whether or not they're competitive in our workplace. They want black people to think of themselves as victims. And we, by the way, we Democrats wear the white hat in that battle. And these SOBs over there, those Republicans, they wear the black hat. That is their narrative, and it is insulting. And that's one of the reasons I'm running for president, to shatter that ridiculous narrative that's hurting the very people that the Democrats purport to care about, mainly black and brown people living in the inner city.
What do you think about the landscape thus far? I mean, Donald Trump, he's in there and he's way ahead. And I get your point on the challenges that he may present as a candidate at the top of the ticket. But what about everybody else in there? I mean, any thoughts one way or another on the rest of the candidates, including, by the way, Scott, who just announced?
Well, Trish, I don't feel I'm running against them. I feel I'm running for this job. I'm auditioning for this job. Mm-hmm. If you like the Donald Trump policies, if you like the way the borders were secured in a way more secure than ever in our history, you like the way the economy was going, lowering regulations, lowering taxes, as you pointed out, supporting somebody who's pro-life, pro-school choice, who's going to put on conservative justices, but you fear that because of Trump derangement syndrome, that a sufficient number of swing voters would not vote for Donald Trump if he walked on water. If that is your fear, you need an alternative. I am that alternative.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's it's an exciting and it's a very positive message that you give. Going back to the book for a second, as goes California, what has been the biggest, I mean, why has this failed so miserably? I remember Gavin Newsom, like back when he was married to Kimberly. It was like, you got to go back like 20 years or so. It might have been around 2000. My husband and I had just moved to California. We kind of caught the tail end of the tech hype. And I nicknamed it, it was San Francisco. I nicknamed it Sucks Francisco. Because I just was like, you gotta be kidding me. Like this place, come on. Like the Beta Breakers race. I remember I was working at the local TV station and like we were in the edit booth and someone said, well, make sure you don't see any body parts, because you can't put those on. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Oh no, they run naked. And I'm like, where the heck did I just move? But it feels quaint, actually, what San Francisco was back then to what it has become now. Gavin Newsom was the mayor. He actually ran on a whole platform of getting the homelessness under control and getting the homeless off the streets and taking that money and putting it into programs for them because he saw this correlation between the handouts and like an hour after the handouts, what do you know? The rates of emergency room visits would skyrocket because people would overdose. And it kind of was like, all right, well, that makes sense. Nothing makes sense anymore, Larry. What happened?
Well, over time, what happened is that California became completely governed by left-wingers. Our Senate now, supermajority Democrats. The Assembly, supermajority Democrats. There hasn't been a Republican elected statewide office in California in almost 20 years. So you name the cockamamie job-killing proposal, they're going to pass it. The tax hike, they're going to pass it. We've got a reparations panel. We've got all these rules and regulations that allow bad guys to remain on the streets. We have cashless bail. We have a situation where the average price of a home in California is 175% above the national average. Why? Because the Democratic Party and the environmental extremists are in bed and virtually any construction is stopped. So we're underdeveloped by over 1 million housing units. That's the primary reason that people cite when they leave California.
It's terrible. It's like a recipe of what not to do. And so you need to make sure that, we're not doing that on a national scale. And yet we are, right? To your point about, okay, let's go and, wave a magic wand and forgive a bunch of Perkins loans and other student loans to the tune of $10,000, $20,000 because somehow it's somebody else's fault that didn't go to college and didn't take out those loans that you can't pay them back. I mean, this lack of responsibility, that's not who we are as Americans. It's not who we were, certainly.
Every dumb idea in the country has already been tried in California twice. We passed laws that reduce sentences for people that assault police officers. That is now a non-violent offense. Serial arson is now a non-violent offense. Rape of an intoxicated victim, now a non-violent offense. When you make it easier for bad guys to be on the street, easier for bad guys not to be convicted, not to go to jail, crime goes up. They may be criminals, but they're not stupid. And that's another reason why people are leaving. And our schools are near the bottom of all 50 states, even though half of the California budget is on automatic pilot and goes to education. We're spending more on K through 12 than ever before. And you're quite right. When Gavin Newsom was mayor of San Francisco, he promised to end homelessness by the time he left term. He served 2 full-time terms. When he left, homelessness was worse. He served 2 full terms as lieutenant governor of California and sat around complaining he had nothing to do. I suggest you go back to San Francisco and complete the promise that you made to people in that city to get rid of homelessness. And of course, he didn't do it. No. And now our problem is even worse here in California.
No, it's a terrifying prospect because our edge, our success, right, has always been based on, one, the belief that you could do better, right? That American opportunity, the American dream, which is so unique to this country, really and truly. You talk to anybody else from around the world, you look at the people lining up at the border, we know why they want to come here. It's their shot at the American dream. And to squander that, or to say, you know, it doesn't matter anymore, to not be as competitive as possible, is really, really and truly a shame. Let me ask you about some other stuff that's going on. I mean, you're talking about crime. You look at what's happened in New York City, for example, where I used to live, and I'm very thankful not to live there anymore, but it's a mess. And there's another woman, I guess, who just got out of critical condition. She is still in critical condition. They're in the hospital in New York City after having her head banged in to a train while just waiting for the train early in the morning to go to work. We've got the Daniel Penny case that people are weighing in on. I mean, obviously extremely sad that the man died, but also sad, can I point out, that an average American, I mean, he happened to be a Marine, but anybody would be put in the spot of having to protect themselves like that. I mean, what are you doing to society when you say, okay, we're not going to have enough police? And by the way, the police, you can't do your job. I mean, it kind of puts the burden on the individuals, and we're seeing more and more evidence of that.
You know, Trish, there is, however you feel about the way Jordan Neely died, there is zero evidence that what motivated Daniel Penny is Jordan Neely's race. Just as there's zero evidence, however you feel about what Derek Chauvin did to George Floyd, that Derek Chauvin was motivated because of George Floyd's race. In fact, the lead prosecutor was a black man who in his opening statement said the police in general are not on trial. The Minneapolis PD is not on trial. This individual is on trial, and he never argued that Derek Chauvin was motivated because of George Floyd's race, and Derek Chauvin was never charged with a hate crime. There were 10,000 homicide victims, black, in the year 2020, almost all of them killed by other black people. A young black male aged 10 to 43, I'm not making this up, is 13 times more likely to be murdered than a young white male of the same demo. And almost always the murderer is another young black male. But we don't get upset about that. Just this past weekend, 21 people were shot in Chicago. But you let a white man put a chokehold on a black man, and all of a sudden, let's march on Albany. It is ridiculous. It is, sure. Again, don't look at the real problems facing black on black crime stemming from the lack of fathers in the home. Let's talk about the rare instance in which there's an interracial black white death. And by the way, in the last several years, there've been about 750 black black homicides. 500 white people have been killed by blacks, even though blacks are just 13% of the population, and 250 whites have been killed by blacks, even though whites are 61% of the population. And you look at whether it's homicides or serial killing or mass shootings, whites underrepresent that category compared to their percentage of the population, and blacks overrepresent. Roughly 60% of all of the homicides, the shootings, and the robberies in America are committed by black people, even though blacks are just 13% of the population. We're
talking with Larry Elder. Yeah, he's the author.
Joe Biden doesn't talk about that.
It's true. I just want to give your book a plug for everybody tuning in right now. We are talking with Larry Elder. He is the author of As Goes California. You can pre-order it right now on Amazon. Larry is running for president of the United States of America. He's very passionate about the changes that we need and the need to kind of get over this division, right? Like this insane division. Let me ask you about something else, because you were a radio host for many, many years and then got into politics, but they're going after AM radio right now. This is an interesting policy one. I mean, I know there's a lot of conservative talk on AM radio. You get some liberal talk as well. One of the things I like from a security perspective about making sure that every car, even the new ones, the fancy new ones that you can plug your iPhone into, that they have radio, AM radio, is because, I don't know, if anything really goes bad, and I hate to think that way, but you kind of need it, right? You really want to have AM radio. It's the reason why hopefully most people have an AM radio somewhere in their house that you can battery up, because that might be your one source to communicate with people. What's your take on AOC and some of these others that want to make sure that AM radio is gone for good?
Well, you know why they want it gone, because conservatives dominate AM radio. If liberals dominated AM radio, we wouldn't have this conversation. I think there are all sorts of commercial reasons why, if I were an auto manufacturer, I would leave it in. And as you pointed out, there's safety reasons for it as well. But I don't believe there ought to be some sort of law forcing auto manufacturers to put AM radio. I think if I were a manufacturer, I would stress that my car has AM radio as a marketing advantage over those that don't have it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I hear you, because it's that sort of free market aspect. Let me take a dive into Florida again with DeSantis, just in light of what you just said. He's in this battle with Disney, and it's getting a little bit ugly. And a lot of conservatives, and I know that my viewers don't necessarily agree with me on this. Look, I'm no fan of Disney. I don't like what Disney's done. I don't like how they're trying to force feed us stuff like Bud Light. But nonetheless, they're an independent company. And if they want to make stupid moves and stupid decisions, then guess what? We're not going to go see their movies, right? Well, they've taken on DeSantis in this really kind of ugly way. I'm all for him in terms of his bill that the liberals label "Don't Say Gay." I mean, it's ridiculous. It's like, let's just not talk about things that little kids don't need to talk about yet. I mean, they can barely process anything. Why would you even go there? It seems just exploitive and treacherous to bring kids into these conversations that are pretty hard for them to grasp. But, he's under all this pressure. So now it's getting kind of nasty with Disney. What do you think of that? Like, is he overstepping his bounds in your view?
Well, all I know is we criticized AOC when she was criticizing Amazon and caused Amazon not to put a facility in New York City that cost them a great deal of jobs and a great deal of taxes. Yeah. And I would be worried about doing the same thing regarding Florida.
Yeah. Okay.
Especially after Florida already fired the executive. They got involved in the so-called Don't Say Gay bill. And the old CEO became the new CEO. He admitted they should not have waded into those territories. So it seems to me that I would be worried about jobs and tax revenues. That said, what DeSantis wants to do is hold Disney to the same standard as every other corporation in Florida. So I'm really kind of agnostic on this battle. I would just be careful not to cost Florida jobs.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think that's a smart and good approach. They need those jobs, but simultaneously they don't. It's not fair if Disney gets certain advantages. I mean, right. I know how much you care passionately about helping all Americans achieve more and seeing the success in education. If you were elected president, what would be sort of your number one? You go in there, and what would it be, Larry? I mean, like, what is it that you want to sort of do and check off right away, first day?
I think the first thing you can do right away is to reverse the anti-oil and gas policies that Biden put into policy. And that's because every single good or service that we have in this country is affected by energy and about the ability to deliver this energy, excuse me, the ability to deliver that good or service to other people. And that requires cheap oil, cheap gas. I would greenlight the Keystone Pipeline. I would allow drilling on federal property. I would reverse the anti-fracking policies and get us back to energy independence. That's the first thing that I could do that would have an almost immediate effect.
That makes a ton of sense. So you're looking forward to some debates?
Well, one of the reasons I want people to go to Elder for President, Trish, is because I'm going to have to raise a certain amount of money in order to qualify for that first debate in Milwaukee in August. And once I get on that debate stage and people hear me, hear my backstory, hear my ideas, see that I'm likable, sense of humor, and I'm a dazzling sex symbol, I think it'll be game over. So I really have to get to that debate stage in August. So
Elder for President. Okay. Elderforpresident.com. And also his book. Hey, I noticed Candace Owens wrote your sort of the prequel, if you will. She wrote a little chapter in the beginning. She has just gotten, well, like you, badly attacked for saying a lot of things that, I think are actually very American, right? In their roots, about just believing in oneself and never thinking that you're the underdog because of these external factors. How'd you get close to her? Just curious.
Well, she calls me one of her mentors and credits me with changing her from being a liberal Democrat to being the conservative that she is. And by the way, I wrote the foreword for her book called Blackout. And so she returned the favor by writing the foreword for mine. And she's getting the same kind of grief that I'm getting. Any black conservative gets it. Benny Thompson, the chairman of the January 6th committee, publicly referred to Clarence Thomas as an Uncle Tom. Nobody said a word. You can call a black conservative everything but a child of God. That's not a problem. But you wound the feelings of a liberal. And oh my goodness, they refer to illegal aliens as undocumented. They refer to people in California who are homeless as unhoused. But it's perfectly okay to refer to a Republican who's a conservative as right wing. And any lifelong Republican who's voted Republican over and over and over again, as I have, is referred to not just as a Republican, but as a Trump Republican. Why? I wasn't going to vote for Hillary or Joe Biden, but I'm called a Trump Republican. The reason the media does that is because they know that much of the country dislikes Donald Trump, and it's sort of a pejorative, puts you in a category so you can sneer your nose at this person and not vote for him. It's incredibly unfair.
It's incredibly unfair and incredibly un-American, and it's not right, and it has to stop. And I'm really worried about our nation. So I am so glad that you are out there sticking your neck out. I know it's not easy, and you take a lot of heat, but thank you for doing it, Larry. And I encourage everybody, Larry, the Elder for President, Larry Elder, author of As Goes California. Go check out his book. You can pre-order it now. Thank you, my friend.
Trish, it's my pleasure. We've got a country to save. God bless.
Sure do. Thank you. Indeed. Indeed. All right. We got a lot more to get to today. A lot of stories that we want to cover here on the program, everyone, as we look at all of these things going on, not just the NAACP getting kind of crazy there on Florida. I'll tell you, that smacks of desperation to me. The fact that they had to come out with a travel warning, like they're the State Department. They're like the State Department saying, hey, don't go to Venezuela right now. I mean, come on. Anyway, they're doubling down on this whole race issue, as Larry just explained, for obvious reasons. They got nothing else, right? What else are you going to talk about? Hey, they have no policy. Joe Biden has nothing. He is being beaten right now in the polls by both Ron DeSantis as well as Donald Trump. So he's nervous. And the thought is, okay, let's just mobilize everybody. Everybody who's a Republican is somehow inherently racist, and that's how we're going to win this. It's not a recipe, in my estimation, for success, but I think they figured, hey, it's worked before, so we'll try again. Senator Tim Scott out of South Carolina declaring his race for president. That just happening today as we wait on Ron DeSantis to likely do the same. Meanwhile, have you guys been drinking any Bud Light? I don't think so, right? Well, Bud Light, major trouble for the company. I've been talking about how the CEO's job may be in jeopardy. Sales are down in the latest week, 26%. And it's spread. It's not just Bud Light. It's Budweiser. It's Mick Ultra. It's all of these brands. Miller Lite as well, seeing some trouble thanks to that woke commercial that gave us some insight into what the company really thinks. But now it's getting even uglier because of something that Senators Ted Cruz and Marsha Blackburn just did. I'm going to tell you about that in just a second. But before I do, first, this news about Bud Light and its CEI rating. Have you heard of CEI? So CEI is another one of these sort of terms. It was actually developed by the Human Rights Watch group because they need to make sure that they are protecting gay, lesbian, bisexual, and trans employees, as well as gay, lesbian, bisexual, and trans consumers and investors. So they came up with what's known as the Corporate Equality Index, CEI. Well, apparently Anheuser-Busch had a 100% rating. It was like perfect score on the CEI index, which, believe it or not, is actually looked at by these ESG investors who kind of control everything right now. So when you wonder, like, why would Anheuser-Busch do something so stupid and alienate all of its customers? Yes, part of it is their woke think and the fact that they moved headquarters from St. Louis to New York City, and you had this girl there who graduated from Harvard and wanted to like change the world through Bud Light. Yes, that's part of it. But a lot of it is also that they're encouraged to have sort of different ideas on how to succeed by these ESG investors like BlackRock, right? Which controls more than half the size of US GDP. I mean, they have so much money under management. And so if you want your company's stock to be invested in by the likes of BlackRock, which is investing on behalf of like every teachers union, every firefighters union, every police union, all these big funds all around the country, well, then you have to kind of get with the program and be ESG compliant, which means you got to have a good CEI score, corporate equity index score, meaning that you treat gay, lesbian, bisexual, and trans employees and customers extremely well. So what's fascinating about Anheuser-Busch, Bud Light, I mean, boy, did they blow it. They blew it with everyone. I mean, not just their consumer base, but everyone. Like even the LGBT community who's like, wait, why aren't you standing up for us? So this was the headline over the weekend. It's actually in today's paper there, the Wall Street Journal. Bud Light blundered in response to backlash. Boy, did it ever. So you know the story. Dylan Mulvaney doing this commercial. And then the company went silent, like wouldn't even talk. And everybody was boycotting it. I know you guys wouldn't drink it. Everybody was kind of freaking out, like, what the heck? And they wouldn't talk. They wouldn't do anything. So a couple weeks later, they have this really kind of half you-know-what statement saying, oh, well, we really thought this would just be about, being together. Like we shouldn't have beer tear people apart. It shouldn't be political, et cetera. Yeah. All right. Well, you guys made it political. No one else did. You guys did that all on your own. So that didn't go over so well. And they came out with some commercials. Commercials didn't go over so well. Stock kept going down, 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 down. Sales kept going down, 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 down. So then the CEO went out and did an interview with the Financial Times, not a U.S. paper, not the Wall Street Journal, but the, big financial paper over there in the UK, the Financial Times, and said, well, it was really just misinformation. So, I mean, you want to talk about adding insult to injury. Everybody's like, no, this wasn't misinformation. Don't gaslight us. We saw the video. Do we need to see it again? Maybe I won't torture you, but you know what I'm talking about. So we all saw the video. This is not misinformation. Sure, it was just one influencer. Sure, it was just one campaign. But what you have to understand in this new woke world is a lot of Americans don't like it. They don't want the interjection of politics into their beverage choices. They don't need to literally have it stuffed down their throat. Thank you very much. And so, understandably, people are upset. And all sides are upset, including the human rights campaign that gave them a bad score now in their corporate equality index. So this company's in trouble. I actually think that the CEO may very well be out of a job. And you say, well, is that fair? Is it not fair? Look, the buck stops somewhere. Does it not? I mean, I know Joe Biden wants to blame Donald Trump for inflation instead of his own policies, including his third stimulus check, his multiple rounds of congressional stimulus, and the fact that he wants to just wave a magic wand and get rid of everybody's college debt. I mean, I know that a lot of people don't believe the buck stops with them, but you know what, it does. And so when you look at the poor performance of Bud Light and the poor performance of Anheuser-Busch, at some point you say, okay, well, you got rid of your two marketing chiefs. What about the CEO? I don't like anybody to lose their job, but I'm just saying, like, I don't know how the company gets through this unless you have just a major shift and a major change. And it's not just him. I actually think it goes back to the root cause. It's my Kamala Harris interpretation. The root cause, which happens to be BlackRock, ESG, things like the Human Rights Campaign, Human Rights, whatever they call themselves. Yeah, for Corporate Equality Index, all of these things that serve as a distraction. So instead of saying, okay, how much beer did you sell? You're more concerned about whether or not you have enough transgenders on your board. That's what's so messed up. Good to have you all here. I'm just looking at some of your questions, some of your comments right now. I see, NAACP is in with Disney. I think that's probably right. I think the NAACP is in with a lot of big corporate America. I mean, that's part of the problem here. You have the Democrat Party totally in bed with corporate America. I mean, BlackRock's like a revolving door. Larry Fink's got his guy, Brian Deese, over there at the National Economic Council. Brian Deese used to run ESG for BlackRock. So it's kind of this revolving door in and out of the administration, including the Treasury Department, other positions there. And consequently, there's like this one little group that's trying to control everything. And by the way, who does it benefit? Not average Americans. It benefits them. It benefits them. Like, how is ESG good for everybody else? it's good for those that are picking the winners and losers. And if you have the ability to do that because you're like, okay, we don't like your energy plan. We don't like this footprint. We think you take too many planes. Oh, and, this, that, and the other. You don't have enough diversity on your board. We want to see more commercials with Dylan Mulvaney. Well, then all of a sudden, you're not caring about earnings, which means you're not caring about your shareholders. And you have a fiduciary duty as a company to care about your shareholders. You're supposed to maximize value for them. But they're not doing that. They're not maximizing value for Larry Fink, maybe for BlackRock. Like if you really want to dig down, I kind of think this whole ESG thing is like a giant Ponzi scheme. It's like everybody's like, oh, I like this company because I think they are, diverse enough or energy green enough or whatever it is. Not because their sales are strong, but because of all these other factors. And so then they're like, okay, well, we're gonna go and buy them. And like, all you guys, because you're our little minions, you got to go buy them too, because they are ESG compliant and friendly. And instead of actually focusing on how the company makes money and how it will succeed in the future, they are distracted by all of that. Indeed. Well, a new wrinkle for Anheuser-Busch and the liberal media is making fun of this over and over and over again. They think it's actually hysterical that Senator Ted Cruz, Senator Marsha Blackburn would say, hey, wait a second, is this company in violation of our rules? Were they actually marketing to children when they launched this campaign? They think that's funny. What I say is, wow, they're onto something, because consider this. I don't have a beer commercial on this program. I don't tell everybody, go drink this beer or that beer or talk about it, other than within the context of what's going on politically, what's going on economically, what's going on in the stock market. In the case of Dylan Mulvaney and TikTok, Dylan Mulvaney, by the way, my audience is not really that demo anyway. I mean, if you're 18, great. Glad you're here watching, but I would say most of you are above 21. It is not intended for kids, but you go over to TikTok and it's a very different kind of platform. It's a very young platform. I mean, we can talk all day about the challenges of that and how bad it is and the fact that it's controlled by China, a Chinese company. And here's the deal. If you're a Chinese company running a company, then guess what? You're pretty in tight with the CCP. So that's that. And you've got an influencer who's appealing to this extremely young demo out there talking about beer on a platform that is going out to very young people. So I think that Ted Cruz and Marsha Blackburn are making a very valid and very important point. And I would say not only should they be going after Anheuser-Busch, but they should be going after the influencer. They should be going after the medium. That would be TikTok. And they should be taking all of that into consideration right now, because these are things you don't really do. I mean, why is an influencer talking about alcohol? Like, that's actually kind of a no-no land. You know, when you go to a site, like if I went to Budweiser right now, AB InBev, that's the company's formal name. If I go to AB InBev, because I want to see what other beers they have, and they have a lot. Well, guess what? I have to actually go in and promise that I am over 21, because we have rules around this. And so somehow they were able to skate by sort of under all of those rules. So when the liberal media makes fun of Ted Cruz and, oh my gosh, what on earth is he doing now? Well, this is a wild one. It's not wild at all. It's actually extremely sensible. And I think that the company should pay a price for that as well. So yeah, the CEO is in trouble. The CEO is going to be in trouble. Another CEO that could be in trouble, we'll see whether or not she's able to pull this together. That would be the CEO over at Fox, because Fox is just hemorrhaging viewers. You've seen the numbers. What were they down to? I saw a number like 1.3 million viewers were tuning in one evening. I mean, they were getting 3.2, upwards of that, with Tucker Carlson, and now they're struggling. So they somehow leaked, maybe they didn't leak, but somebody leaked to Judge last week, the Judge report, that there would be a new lineup coming in. The Handy would be coming in at 8. Nobody knew what was going to happen to Laura. The company actually had to issue a statement and said, like, nothing's definitive. And, regardless, Laura is a big part of our lineup and will continue to play a big role here at the network. But they kind of tipped their hands, and that now everybody's like, okay, so they're going to do something different. But here's the thing, they have to do something different. Like, if I'm a shareholder right now, I'm like, what, whoa, what just happened? Because You got a nearly $800 million fine. You just lost your biggest star. There's talk of more people leaving. What are you doing? Right? Newsmax is out there now beating CNN. And Newsmax is kind of, right there at your heels. And look, if that momentum continues for Newsmax, they've got a real shot. Meanwhile, hey, you guys are all over here, right? You found me, which is awesome. And I would encourage you, if you have not already, to make sure that you go and you subscribe. Just hit the subscribe button. Do it on my podcast too, if you could. The audio version over on Apple Podcasts, it would be great. So you just have to follow it over there. It doesn't cost anything. You can follow it. You can give a rating if you would. A thumbs up here on YouTube, it helps. Every bit helps. And if you share this, it helps even more because it's just, the way the algorithms work. So you've got a new media environment out there, which I actually think is going to be very painful for legacy media companies as more people go and they switch. Now you're going to be able to apparently watch Tucker Carlson on Twitter. You're here watching me right now. I mean, we do have our challenges. I started this little station, this little channel, this little network kind of from scratch. Literally from scratch. I don't know if you saw my challenges there when I was talking to Larry, and I was like, okay, at one point I was trying to put him on camera, but I was the only one on camera. I appreciate all your forgiveness for any of my tech challenges. And those that were with me, I know, Leslie, I saw you there on the list. Leslie joining the program here in the commentary. Leslie was definitely there in the beginning. Like, you guys were like, wait, Trish, your mic doesn't work. I'm like, what? And I was totally reliant on you. So we started this. I sort of started this, and I do have some people that help and are wonderful at helping me put all this together, especially from a mechanical standpoint. But I am like the person that doesn't even know how to use my computer, really, or my microwave. We were like the last in my little town growing up to get a microwave. We used to rent a VCR, and we never really wanted one because we didn't know how they worked. So I am not what you call really tech savvy, except that I've become more tech savvy in part because, I've had to. And in, the days of March 2020, and when we launched this, it was probably in summer of 2020. It was like, okay, well, how do I turn the camera on? How do I turn the microphone on? Oops, I'm live and my microphone's not working. So there were all of those hiccups and pains. And hopefully Tucker will be smarter than that. And he will make sure that he has all the proper infrastructure before he just decides to go live. But me, I'm like, okay, let's just do it. Anyway, I'm here now with you and I love it. And we've been growing. We're above 60,000 now right here on this little channel. And it's thanks to you guys sharing it, commenting on it. If you could, when you're make sure you go and you leave a comment below, because once again, it all helps. Thank you. GS, thank you. The show is outstanding. He says, I'm so glad that you like it. I'm so glad that you're all here. And it's just an important time. And the reason I think that, whether it's the CEO there at Bud Light that's going to be challenged, or whether it's Suzanne Scott over at Fox News that's going to be challenged, if you can't lead an organization through a treacherous time, then what happens to the organization? Ultimately, you don't want the organization failing, and so some executives will have to go. Wall Street's been quite forgiving in terms of the analyst community of Anheuser-Busch. You only had one analyst that I've seen so far come out and say, hey, this is a hold. I mean, he didn't even say it was a sell, but that was the HSBC analyst who was like, I don't know if the CEO is going to be able to get the company through this challenging time. I mean, it may just be that people never forgive them, too. They're going to try a new sort of military-inspired campaign. They're going to have camouflage on the cans, but everybody's going to look at it and be like, hey, you're drinking a Bud Light. And I think it's going to be so hard for them to overcome that. Maybe they'll rebrand maybe they won't call it Bud Light. They'll call it something else entirely. But then you're starting all over, right? So that is going to be very painful for the stock, for the company, much like it's going to be painful over at Fox. So I think a lot of people wound up cutting their Fox streaming service. I don't know what that is, that Fox Nation thing, where you pay $6 a month or $6 a year. I don't know what it is, but we know CNN was not successful with it. And I think that Fox was probably trying to prop it up. I imagine that a lot of people canceled the day that Tucker left. I know how angry you were when I parted ways. And by the way, I appreciate that. And I appreciate your loyalty, really. And I think that they've just had a succession of people that they've been like, see you, because you're willing to say something that maybe the mainstream media is not so fond of. In my case, I pointed to how political the whole March 2020 2020 thing had become. I mean, insanely political. And what do you know? I was right. And Neil Gorsuch, Supreme Court Justice, saying it was the biggest infringement on our civil liberties in history. I'm going to get to that in just a moment. But as we look at Fox and we consider the future of the company, I don't think they have a very deep bench. I don't think they have a lot of people that they can kind of plug and play. Maybe they put Hannity in, whether or not he's able to get the job done. I'm not so sure. I don't think that that's going to be the answer. I think Tucker was a very different kind of talent. And I think I was a very different kind of talent. I mean, I'm looking at things not just from a political perspective, but from an economic perspective. He was really good at looking at things through that social lens in the future. And so consequently, they're going to have a lot of difficulty in the future. But it's not just that, it's the leadership of the organization, because you have to ask yourself, how did they get to the position where they were being fined what they were being fined by Dominion? They still got to go through Smartmatic, right? I mean, that is ultimately, I think, a reflection of leadership not being able to sort of keep the wheels on the bus and like keep everybody, usually at a network. And by the way, this is what I don't like about networks, to be very clear. I mean, the freedom that one has here is amazing. Even if I get just 60,000 of you, it's amazing freedom. And I don't have anybody upstairs saying, okay, you can say this, you can't say that, you can have this guest, you can't have that guest. And who knows why? Like sometimes you're not even told why. You're just like, nope, can't have that one. And so I have wonderful freedom here. And I think a lot of people that have come out of Fox have chosen this route and been successful at it. And how you want to measure success, you can measure that in different ways. I think if you probably need a steady paycheck, then maybe you go and you take another network job. In my case, it's all about, how do I build something new? How do I develop more of a connection with my audience? And to me, that's more valuable than any quote unquote network job. It is. And I've had opportunities to go other places and really made this decision in part because of what I went through. I mean, heck, who wants to ever go through anything like that again? So for all you small business owners out there, here. I mean, that is so rewarding to create something yourself and to be in charge of yourself and your own destiny, right? So that's a big part of what I do. It's why I think that probably is the future for a lot of content creators. I think that there's going to be a shift where people find their information in different places and different sources, and it's pretty easy to do. And perhaps part of the uptick in the number of people coming here and finding this podcast and finding the channel on YouTube or finding me on a variety of platforms, Facebook as well, or Locals, which I'm over at trishregan.locals.com or Rumble or Apple Podcasts. All of this is about people sampling different things and saying, okay, well, I don't need to rely on that television for my content. I can go get it myself. And so it's very empowering for the consumer. It's also very empowering for us as creators, for sure. I do think that Suzanne will have to negotiate this very difficult time for the organization. And given all the challenges that they were met with, and clearly, they never should have been in the position of having a lawsuit to begin with. I'll just say that. Like, nobody knew, by the way, nobody knew in the beginning, that they're making these accusations about Dominion. As a journalist, when the president or the president's advisors are making these accusations, then it seems as though it is your obligation to follow up on them. And so I don't fault them for that. But at some point, when they seem to know otherwise, and that was reflected in the text messages, and yet they kept going down the rabbit hole. Well, if they knew one thing and did another, and they didn't have anybody managing them to appropriately, negotiate that situation, they wound up being in a situation where they were led by their viewers instead of them leading their viewers, which is an interesting thing to think about, right? I mean, I'll tell you exactly what I think. You may not agree with it, but I'm always going to tell you exactly what I think. And I'm often in a situation where you guys are like, no, Trish, we totally disagree. Elon Musk was one. I told you, did I not, that deal would go through? And you guys were like, oh, because you didn't like what the company, and I get it, you didn't like what they were doing to Elon. You agreed with him that he had overpaid and that things were not really adding up. But I was like, hey, this is just reality. The Delaware court is not going to reverse this one. This deal is going to go through. at the full share price. I mean, maybe he'll get a haircut. I think I said that because, you never know. Like maybe Twitter will just get worn down. And like Tiffany, when Tiffany got bought, they agreed to a smaller price tag because they just didn't want to go through the legal hassle. But in the case of Twitter, I told you it would go through, and sure enough, it did. So in the case of leadership over at Fox or over at Anheuser-Busch, you need to be able to be a strong leader. You need to kind of take the troops through it. And in some cases, this may have been, okay, well, Tucker, if you don't think that there was anything there with the Dominion stuff, then you've got to find a way, and she should have worked with him and his team, found a way to tell that story in a way that really wouldn't annoy everyone, like, the marketing executive or Bud Light did. I mean, that is what leadership is about. But they didn't have any leadership there. And so they were put in that situation. And interestingly, she hasn't paid any of the consequence thus far. We will see what happens in the future, though. And a lot of it may come down to whether or not the Murdochs actually think she can lead them through this. And maybe they threw her a bone with Tucker getting ousted. But what happens now? I wish her well. I think she's a lovely, lovely, lovely person. And she's been there forever. And, everybody has different strengths, and leading talent like that. I mean, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. Do you know how like these big personalities, these quote unquote talent can be? It can be hard to manage that. It can be. And so you need a really, really strong leader in the seat to be able to corral everybody, to get them on the same page, because, everybody has a different view. But when you work in a network, you kind of have to like toe this line. And if nobody's making you toe the line or cares whether you toe the line, and if all they care about is ratings, then people aren't going to really toe the line, and then they get led by some of their viewers. And I suspect that that's in part what happened. Again, I wish the company well. I had however many years there and enjoyed most of my time. most of it. But this is better. Trust me, it's better because, there's no needing to toe the line. William Cordes, thank you so much. It's very kind of you. I love this appreciation you guys have for independent creators. And it's wonderful, wonderful to see. I do think that this is the future. Anyway, moving on to what happened in March 2020. I want to share with you, Supreme Court Justice is out with a statement. And wow, he's not holding back. It is a pretty aggressively worded review of that COVID lockdown and what we went through as a nation. All those businesses that closed, the mandates that were put in, according to Supreme Court Justice Gorsuch, it was, quote, among the greatest intrusions on civil liberties in the history of the nation. Hear, hear. I agree with Supreme Court Justice wholeheartedly. And I'm very frightened that happened, and I'm frightened that it could possibly happen again. Because you saw how quickly everybody kind of fell in line. It was like, get with the program, and we're going to shut everything down, except nothing was consistent. I mean, you could have casinos open, you could have bars open, but you couldn't have churches open. Like, that made sense. Which goes back to what I said from day one. It was political. I mean, sure, there was a health component. Of course. But they used that for political purposes. And they shut a country down for political purposes. I mean, just look at everything that happened, for example, with Fauci, et cetera. It's very clear. It's very clear. And so Neil Gorsuch is calling them out. He labeled this whole sort of series of lockdowns that we had and all of these mandates as among the greatest intrusions of civil liberties in history. He said that state and federal level emergency decrees were declared on a, quote, breathtaking scale. And Congress and state legislators, they, quote, too often fell silent as strict rules were laid down. And he is right. It was like the nation was just paralyzed with fear. And I'm like, no, guys, listen, whatever you do, don't let fear get in the way of moving forward. And in the case of what we were going through, you needed a strong economy to fight that. So the answer should have been all along, okay, you know what? If you are in a vulnerable group, or if you are around people, live with people that are in a vulnerable group, then yes, we need to protect you. but everybody else kind of needs to keep it going. It's actually what Florida did. I've talked to people that were in Florida and they said, oh, we closed down for a couple of weeks, but that was it. We closed down for a couple of weeks. That was it. I'm going to have more on Supreme Court Justice Gorsuch, as well as, we're going to get to this story about Kevin McCarthy saying he's about to get his hands on some pretty important documents out of the FBI that maybe possibly suggest the FBI thought, or at least this is from the informant, it hasn't been checked and rechecked, and you have to be careful of that. Obviously, we don't want another Trump dossier situation, but the FBI did interview somebody, and they've got some information that would suggest, allegedly, that Joe Biden was getting kickbacks from overseas countries in a pay-to-play kind of scandal. So we'll get to that in just a moment. But before I do, just a quick shout out from one of our wonderful sponsors here, Legacy Precious Metals. You know this company. I talk about them a lot. They were the first sponsor on this program. Legacy Precious Metals. You can reach them at 1-866-589-0560. You can go to their website, legacypminvestments.com. I think Charles Thorngren, the CEO, is going to come on the show this week. We should have him on because, we're going through this whole debt crisis. And it's insane to me that we're even having to have these discussions, but the political brinksmanship, if you would, is just off the charts, insane, and not going away. So anyway, as I check gold right now, it's an interesting one to keep an eye on. It's just under $2,000 an ounce. So we'll see if Charles will come on and give us some insight into all of that. It is something that many of you are interested in. And so I encourage you, if you are, go check out legacypminvestments.com, 1-866-589-0560. You can buy and sell it actually on the website, or you can call them because they get a great sales team. And please, you're welcome to use my name because they know me very well. And like I said, I like Charles and I like the whole team there because they were the first sponsor and they're the sponsor here every single day. So we like those guys a lot, and feel free, as I said, to use my name. Turning back to all that's happening right now. Gorsuch, this is really, it's so true, everything that he said, but it's really alarming to think that, this is the kind of stuff that can happen on a breathtaking scale when you have that much fear in society. So in this statement, he gave examples of how authorities surveilled church parking lots, recorded license plates, and issued notices warning that attendance at even outdoor services satisfying all state social distancing and hygiene requirements could amount to criminal conduct. He went on to explain how federal executive officials entered the act too through vaccine mandates, which included threats of dismissal for employees and service members who refused. Along the way, he writes, it seems federal officials may have pressured social media companies to suppress information about pandemic policies with which they disagreed. Yeah. Emergency decrees were issued at a, quote, furious pace while Congress and state legislators fell too silent, he said. The statement was actually part of this whole Title 42 public health emergency policy, so they had to roll that back. And a lot of states were like, hey, don't roll it back. And he was making the point that, we don't really have the authority to do that. And by the way, let's talk about this authority. I want to go back to his writing here because this was just so important for anybody who's freedom-minded. He wrote, many lessons can be learned from this chapter in our history, and hopefully serious efforts will be made to study it. One lesson might be this: fear and the desire for safety are powerful forces. They can lead to a clamor for action, almost any action, as long as someone does something to address a perceived threat. A leader or an expert who claims he can fix everything if only we do exactly as he says, can prove an irresistible force. Make no mistake, he concluded, decisive executive action is sometimes necessary and appropriate. But if emergency decrees promise to solve some problems, they threaten to generate others. And rule by indefinite emergency edict risks leaving us all with a shell of a democracy and civil liberties just as hollow. Well said, Mr. Gorsuch. Well said. I mean, it's alarming in that you can see how fast and furious those things kick in. And you can see how somebody like Fauci suddenly became the be all end all. And he was like, achieving godlike status among the liberal media because he was going to somehow save us from everything. Ultimately, and you can go to a number of studies, what we learned was that there was not actually a huge reduction in COVID mortality as a result of those shutdowns. In fact, one study here found that it reduced COVID mortality by 3% in the UK, US, and Europe in the year 2020. This is a study by Johns Hopkins University. And then there was a study out of Sweden, as well as a Danish think tank called the Center for Political Studies, that suggested that, in fact, no, there was no huge benefit to these lockdowns. Official data, of course, shows that the U.S. did suffer more deaths than usual as a result of the pandemic, but that they could not be attributed to COVID because what happened? People didn't go and get the necessary care that they otherwise would have gotten because their whole lives were upended. Everything was shut down. All the sort of, care that you would go and get for preemptive health reasons, you couldn't get, right? Like you couldn't go to the doctor. So consequently, there were people that died of other things, and not to mention the mental health crisis, which is still taking its toll on our society. Not to mention what we did to our kids. They will forever be behind because they weren't in school for that long. So all of this stuff we need to think about. We need to think about long and hard because we can't have that happen again. I mean, I think that that's the biggest warning to all of us. We need to be able to voice our own opinions. We need to be able to make sure that we have lawmakers there that are diverse in their opinions and that don't go into this group thought with a, okay, thank you, Fauci, whatever you say, mentality. Fauci, who had no interest in talking to economists or mental health experts. He had one lane and one lane only. And we paid the price for it in many, many, many ways. All right. FBI, meanwhile, might have some goods on Joe Biden. We know, of course, that the FBI was looking into Hunter Biden. That was another no-no, right? You couldn't talk about that. New York Post had its Twitter account shut down because you weren't allowed to talk about that because, all the ex-spooks were telling us that it was misinformation when it turns out it wasn't misinformation. In fact, the FBI was looking into this and they're continuing to look into this. And so a whistleblower came forward and told some Republicans that, hey, there's this one document that is pretty explosive and suggests that there may have been this pay-to-play thing going on when Joe was in the White House. So, of course, Republicans want to get their hands on that and they want to get to the bottom of that. What I would question is, where's that investigation going? Like, I hope they're still working on that investigation. One would think, but, I have my doubts given some of the other stuff that we have seen. Nonetheless, Kevin McCarthy thinks he can get it. And he told Maria Bartiromo, actually over on Fox News over the weekend, that he expected to have it. He had a conversation with Christopher Wray on Friday, head of the FBI, and he pointed out, look, we have jurisdiction over this. We are, very much entitled to this, and we would like to see this. Now, the FBI is like, hey, all this information is out there anyway, so we don't want to give you this particular document because we haven't been able to necessarily, they haven't told us this definitively or not, but they're sort of saying, these kind of documents, they haven't been fully verified, they haven't been fully vetted, et cetera, et cetera. But the Republicans are like, no, like we want it. The danger with this, I'm just gonna, again, like I'll tell you everything. I'm an open book, and my only interest is the health of the country. I think the FBI is kind of out of control. We've got some information that shows that, they were like using FISA warrants like you wouldn't believe and like spied on tons of Americans. And we can talk about that. So I am no fan of the FBI. However, you also don't want to be in a situation where you've got this smoking gun that hasn't been investigated. What we need to do is investigate that. If Joe Biden was taking kickbacks, as we have heard from a series of allegations, then we as Americans, we deserve to know that. And we have to know that, by the way, before 24. Like, that is actually critical. We need to know what was going on before 2024. They were all just willing to jump as soon as there was an opportunity to go after Donald Trump. they certainly did that. But now, oh no, because you can't go after Joe Biden. He's our new savior. Well, look, we need to get to the bottom of that. I hope the FBI is investigating it. And if the FBI can't, then somebody's got to get it to members of Congress that can investigate this, because we need answers. We need the truth. If nothing else, to say the guy's clear, right? Like if he's clear, then okay. But, otherwise it's going to lurk out there, hang over their head. Meanwhile, as I said, Big Brother is for real. These FISA warrants were out of control. We learned that the FBI actually conducted 278,000 improper searches on Americans. This would be in the year 2020. In early 2021, this was all tied to, January 6th, of course. It was really incredible. The Bureau, here's this one thing. They've got this one section. It's called Section 702, and 702 was put in place after 9/11, so you could basically track anyone if you were fearful that any American had some contact with anybody overseas, internationally, for example. So that would mean if you have any contact that you had internationally that they say, oh, maybe we're suspicious of anybody outside the U.S. that you might have emailed, well, suddenly that then gives them, the federal government, the FBI, the ability to then go in and look at everything with you, most likely without you knowing. I don't think that 3.4 million people knew that they were being searched in 2021 via this Section 702. So FBI's had way too much power, in part because of this. I remember actually when it first went into being, and that was, of course, under a conservative, it was under Bush. And I had liberal friends at the time that were like really kind of alarmed by it. And I heard them like, I was okay, I get it, guys, because yes, we want to be safe, and I'm super hawkish on that. But simultaneously, you're right in that this could be a slippery slope. And I think you have to think about that as a freedom-minded person. It is a slippery slope where the FBI can get in and kind of do whatever it wants to do. So it's set to expire. It's going to expire, I think, this year. And it's probably important that happens sooner rather than later. Some people are like, oh, let's redo it and do this, that, and the other. And I'm like, no. You just want that gone because you don't want the federal government having the ability to kind of intrude on your life. As we have seen, they're quite willing, are they not, to do it? Indeed. Anyway, like I said, so great to have you guys all here. We've covered a lot of ground today, and we're going to continue this week because it is a big week. Like I said, Ron DeSantis likely running for president. We expect that announcement relatively soon. The other thing that I would just point out at this moment is we're learning some new things about Jeffrey Epstein and how he may have appeared to threaten Bill Gates over an alleged affair that Bill Gates had. This story to me is very interesting, the Jeffrey Epstein thing, because, nothing really adds up. And there's way too much coincidence in all of it. So as you recall, he was this financier who kind of was dealing in this uber elite community of very well-known people in academics and in finance and in the arts and in tech. And he kind of had relationships with everyone. And he had his own indiscretions, so we say. I mean, it was pretty bad. I mean, the guy was a convicted felon for molesting young girls. I mean, just awful stuff. And what was weird to me was that he continued relationships with so many pretty prominent people, even after all these allegations. Now, look, these prominent people, they're not even going to go near Donald Trump, right? They're like, ooh, Donald Trump is really, really bad. They're not going to be seen with him. And yet all of these people, they continued their relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Why? I mean, it's a strange story. And then in the terms of, the Wall Street Journal is reporting this story on Gates and Epstein, and they're alleging that basically Epstein was paying for his girlfriend's school so she could become a coder. I mean, it's wacky stuff. The other thing that the Wall Street Journal has had, they've been all over this story, interestingly, is they've gotten access to his extra diary, maybe the computer schedule or something. It wasn't the black book. And it suggests that there were a lot of meetings with a lot of people, very, very important people. There was someone there, a woman at Goldman, who definitely was not his demo. She was in her 50s, and she was, I think, an attorney. She might have been representing Goldman. And consequently, you're like, what really, why? How did he have all these meetings? How did he still have all of this power over all of these people? And why were people still interested in seeing him? Former head of the CIA took a meeting with him. That came out thanks to the Wall Street Journal. So, I don't know. There was a story in Rolling Stone, I think. Vicky Ward, I think, reported this, that he might have been part of Israeli intelligence. It's, I guess, one heck of a cover. you are somehow able to access a lot of critical people on the world stage, and you kind of get the goods on them, I guess. Anyway, it's continuing to unravel, and I don't want to speak without really understanding the story. We've got to get somebody who's been watching this very closely on the program to kind of give us some more insight, but it just doesn't really add up to me. I'm guessing you're probably in the same crowd on that. Anyway, again, great to see everybody. Love having you here. Continue sharing the show. Make some comments. I always read them. I really do. I read them, and I love hearing from you. So we will do it again tomorrow, probably around 12:30. Does that work? I'll see you then.